Number 6. Skymaster down. While on a remote airfield just outside of Anchorage, Alaska, Master Sergeant Robert Espy with the U.S. Air Force had to say goodbye to his wife Joyce and their 2-year-old son on January 26, 1950. Joyce was 7 months pregnant at the time, which only made leaving Robert that much worse. And she was originally from India, so she was already having a hard time with the Alaskan winter. On the flight were Joyce, her son, and 42 other U.S. servicemen heading on their way to Great Falls, Montana. From there, she planned to travel to Rifle, Colorado, where she had close friends and intended to give birth to her second child. The aircraft she was on, a Douglas C-54D Skymaster, was a transport carrier that had been used in World War II. The plane had an 8-person crew and had room for an additional 50 passengers, and luckily, everyone on board was fitted with a parachute in case of an emergency. Joyce and her son were seated next to Sergeant Roy Jones, a close friend of Robert's from the base who'd reached the end of his service and was headed home to be discharged. The flight seemed to be going well, but around 2 hours after takeoff, the plane's radio operator checked in with air traffic control over a settlement called Snag along the Yukon's White River, which was the last time anyone heard from the Skymaster. At some point after passing over Snag, the aircraft vanished, and no trace of it has ever been found despite numerous search efforts to locate it. After finding out about the plane's disappearance, Robert Espy reportedly said, "I've gone through all the hysterics and cried myself silly. I'm just stunned." While it's bizarre for an aircraft to completely vanish without a trace, it's not all that uncommon. Stories like this have cropped up every couple of years since we've been able to make international flights. But in 2018, a glimmer of hope was discovered by a man named Andrew Gregg, which seemed to offer a clue into the mystery surrounding the missing Douglas C-54D Skymaster. As Andrew was visiting retired archaeologist Greg Hare in Whitehorse, Canada, he noticed something peculiar on one of the man's shelves in his storeroom at Yukon Archaeology. The object, which was green, mangled, and covered in rust, appeared to be a salvaged chunk of burnt airplane gear. Andrew was told by the man that the artifact likely fell from a drop tank, an auxiliary fuel container that's typically used on long military flights. Hare and one of his colleagues, Ty Hefner, found the piece of plane gear and originally thought it was part of the U.S. military plane that disappeared in 1950 with 44 passengers on board. And while this artifact hasn't been proven to come from the missing Skymaster, it did spark Andrew's interest in the mystery, and he's been obsessed with it ever since. Andrew is a filmmaker who since gathered footage in the Yukon to use in his new documentary about the plane called Skymaster Down. This disappearance remains one of Canada's worst aviation disaster in the country's history, and over 70 years later, it's still a mystery that nobody's been able to solve. There have been a total of 510 plane crashes over the Yukon, and out of those wrecks, only 4 planes have yet to be recovered, one being the Skymaster from 1950. According to Andrew, this plane just refuses to turn up. While completing rescue missions for the supposed downed aircraft, 3 other planes crashed in the Yukon. One such aircraft, a Douglas C-47D, was found near Haines Junction, lending an eerie peek into the past. It crashed on February 7, 1950, while searching for the Skymaster. All 10 people on board remarkably survived the wreck and only sustained minor injuries, but the main rescue mission was halted while the crew from the C-47D were saved. It still sits in a remote and barren field surrounded by rocky mountains, but it doesn't help solve the mystery of the missing plane. All 44 passengers on board the lost flight have since been presumed dead, but Andrew's documentary on the incident, which first aired in January of 2022, breathes new life into the search for the Skymaster. Hopefully, in the near future, the wreckage will be found since, after all, everything turns up eventually. Number 5. Sahara Desert Plane Crash. A parachute and bones were discovered near an eerily preserved plane that crashed in the Sahara Desert over 80 years ago. The wreckage of the P-40 Kitty Hawk was found by accident in 2012. The body, which is believed to belong to Airman Dennis Copping, was located near the site on some rocks just 3 miles from where the aircraft crash-landed in 1942. Close to the man's remains were a keychain fob with the number 61 engraved onto it, along with a metal button dated from the year 1939. According to Copping's relatives, the Ministry of Defense told him that the bones didn't belong to the lost airman. But apparently the skeleton was never recovered for analysis, meaning that there's a chance it could be that of Flight Sergeant Copping. Back in 2012, one of the man's living relatives, William Pryor Bennett, urged for DNA tests to be carried out on the remains. 62-year-old Pryor Bennett told the Daily Mail that he was utterly appalled by the way the matter was handled. To this day, it doesn't seem like any tests have been done to the bones, and they're still supposedly lying in the desert. Copping had been flying between two British military bases in Egypt amidst the North Africa campaign during World War II when he vanished along with his plane. When the aircraft was discovered in 2012, there were clear signs that Copping had initially survived the crash, and there was a makeshift shelter that he'd created using his parachute on the outside of the plane. But unfortunately, the bones found near the wreck site tell the end of the story, showing evidence that the man died while attempting to walk out of the desert. Allegedly, 12 of the man's bones were found by a team of Italian historians. Independent forensic anatomist Dr. Lawrence Gary studied the images of the bones and confirmed that they belonged to a human without a doubt. However, the Ministry of Defense stated that because there was no military clothing found near the bones, they had no reason to believe the skeleton belonged to Copping. The MOD's resources are limited to investigate such a discovery found in a remote part of the Sahara Desert, but reportedly they're still in contact with the lost airman's family as well as the embassy in Cairo. Unfortunately, until more evidence is revealed that proves the bones belong to Copping, there likely won't be any further investigation into the matter. For now, the P-40 Kitty Hawk is in the Egyptian government's possession, who's since given the aircraft a hideous makeover. The plane was painted yellow and brown and was given shark teeth as part of a restoration project. It's now on display at the El Alamein Military Museum in Marina, Egypt. Number 4. The Passenger from Hell. Have you ever sat next to someone on the plane that made the entire flight miserable? Well, this exact scenario occurred on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico that was heading to John F. Kennedy Airport in New York in November of 2015. A passenger on American Airlines Flight 937 caught the attention of several other passengers when he drunkenly attempted to take off his pants and tried to smoke multiple cigarettes in the cabin. The 4-hour flight was delayed on the tarmac for an hour and a half before it managed to get into the air, and by that time, passengers noticed that the man had already downed the majority of a bottle of Dewar's Scotch. An individual who was only identified as Otto explained to The Gothamist that the man looked at him and said, "I'm just looking for my wife," and when he was told he didn't know where the woman was, he replied, "You better not know where she is." After this interaction, the man decided to unbuckle his pants and get a bit more comfortable. But before he managed to strip down, another passenger called a flight attendant and reported his indecent behavior. Then, just as a stewardess was arriving, he tried to light up a cigarette. Luckily though, the flight attendant didn't allow him to do so and took the man's cigarettes away from him. It should have been over after that, but the passenger continued to cause issues, even pulling out a second pack of cigarettes, prompting the man to sit next to him to yell in Spanish, "Listen buddy, you can't smoke cigarettes on a plane." Other passengers on the flight pleaded with the attendants to arrest or at least restrain the drunk flyer, but there wasn't any air marshal on board, and the crew members didn't want to hold him in case he became violent. And so, they basically babysat him instead until they arrived at their destination. Over the course of the flight, the man pulled his pants down to his ankles and refused to cover himself with a blanket. While nobody was injured during the incident, everyone was made to feel uncomfortable by this inappropriate behavior. When the plane landed at JFK, law enforcement met the flight due to the disruptive passenger. However, there weren't any arrests made according to the Port Authority. The story just goes to show that apparently you can get away with a lot more on an aircraft than most people realize. Number 3. Strange objects overhead. Over Arizona in 2018, 2 different airline pilots reported seeing UFOs flying above their planes, according to CBS Denver. The Federal Aviation Administration also released audio of the radio broadcasts from the bizarre incident. Radio logs proved that a pilot operating an American Airlines flight and another in control of a Phoenix Air Learjet saw the same object flying in complete opposite direction of their planes on February 24th. The Phoenix Air pilot was the first to spot the UFO at around 3:30 p.m., at which point he called down to the FAA and asked, Was anybody above us that passed us like 30 seconds ago? To the pilot's surprise, the answer he received was negative. Then, less than a minute later, the FAA received a second report of the mysterious object from American Airlines Flight 1095. The pilot claimed that something passed over them, but he couldn't identify what it was. He added that the UFO must have been at least 2,000 or 3,000 feet above the plane. Apparently, the object had a big reflection, and the pilots doubted that it could have been a weather balloon. And while it's not certain whether or not the mysterious craft had extraterrestrial origins, there hasn't been any evidence to prove otherwise. So what do you think they really saw in the sky that day? Aliens or something else? Number 2. Danger mid-flight. In early 2022, on a flight bound from Los Angeles, California to Washington, D.C., an unruly male passenger attempted to open the door of the plane, causing the aircraft to divert to Kansas City, Missouri. According to a spokesperson for the Association of Professional Flight Attendants, the reckless man tried to open the forward passenger door until a stewardess used a coffee pot to subdue him. The man also allegedly attempted to rush the cockpit, but he failed. One person on the flight tweeted about the ordeal, saying it felt like the plane was free-falling and many feared the worst because people weren't fully aware of what was unfolding. That same individual described the unruly passenger as a middle-aged man. Apparently, during the man's delusional attempts to open a cabin door in the aircraft, a flight attendant struck him multiple times with a coffee pot, while other passengers restrained him for everyone else's safety. American Airlines confirmed after the incident that the flight was diverted due to the man's erratic behavior. But despite the circumstances, the plane landed safely at the Kansas City International Airport, where it was met by law enforcement. In what seemed to be a matter of national security, the FBI got involved. However, the agency reported after the fact that the unruly individual was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the suspect's name was never released to the public, so it's unclear what repercussions he faced in the aftermath of his actions. Number 1. Crazy Cat Lady. In 2015, on a flight headed from Las Vegas to Frankfurt, Germany, a crazy cat lady caused such a commotion that the plane had to be escorted to Denver by a pair of fighter jets. The woman supposedly became upset after the plane's crew put her cat in a bathroom. Apparently, she'd entered the aircraft with the animal stored in her purse, not in a proper pet carrier, so the only thing the crew could think to do was to put the cat in the lavatory. According to passenger Deshenka Giraldo, the woman was so distraught that she even claimed to be part of the mafia and said she could bring the plane down if that's what she needed to do in order to see her cat. While it's unclear if she really was part of the mafia or if she was just desperate to see her fur baby, her actions were completely uncalled for. Fritz Peterson, another man who happened to be on the flight, told CBS Local that the lady wasn't at all happy with the plane's crew for putting her cat in the lavatory because after that, everything went wrong. The woman began to lash out at anyone who stood against her, even punching a flight attendant in the face. After she made threats to down the aircraft, the pilot made a call and alerted authorities to the situation unfolding on board. This resulted in 2 F-16 fighter jets being sent from Buckley Air Force Base to escort the plane to safety in Denver. After arriving, the unruly woman was questioned about her erratic behavior. In the end, the FBI got involved but announced a while later that the passenger wasn't facing any charges for her threats and actions, citing the whole ordeal as a misunderstanding.
8. P-40 Kitty Hawk. A World War II-era P-40 Kitty Hawk aircraft was recovered from the Black Sea at the Kerch Bridge construction site in May of 2017. Work was being done in order to connect the Taman coast to the Crimean Peninsula as well as the Russian mainland. The project is now complete, and it's known as the Crimean Bridge. According to reports from the Crimea Bridge Information Center, the aircraft was discovered on the seafloor along with the perimeter of the massive construction project, located roughly 4 miles from the Taman coast. Resting 9 meters below the surface was a fuselage with a tail and wings. It was eventually raised out of the water by a crane, and it weighed over 3.5 tons. 6 Colt Browning machine guns equipped with ammo were also pulled from the wreck site. Part of the Kitty Hawk's dashboard and pilot seat were still intact, as well as the craft's engine. Visible markings were also discovered on the engine, which allowed investigators to identify the aircraft and will eventually help them determine the circumstances surrounding its crash. Lifting the plane out of the water was no easy task. It took an entire week to prepare for it. The structure had to be dug out of the surrounding mud in order to discard as much sand and debris as possible. And even with all the planning involved, the tail section of the Kitty Hawk broke while a team attempted to lift the wreckage. While it's not entirely clear what happened to the plane during its discovery, it's implied that it'll likely be transported to a museum after the necessary restoration work is complete. 7. Greenland shark. In the summer of 2022, researchers working to tag tiger sharks off the southern coast of Belize reeled in something rather unexpected. The team of scientists from the Florida International University couldn't believe it when they identified the fish to be a Greenland shark. This species is typically only found in the Arctic and is known to live well over 500 years. When they caught their first glimpses of the shark after hauling it to the surface, they thought it might be dead. They'd expected to see the typical markings of a tiger shark, but instead they'd caught a shark with pale blue eyes and black, worn-looking skin. PhD candidate Devanshi Kasana from the university's Predator Ecology and Conservation Lab told NPR reporters that the shark looked extremely old. The unexpected catch both surprised and confused the scientists, and they reported seeing a black figure that continued to get bigger and bigger when the shark first entered their field of vision. When it finally breached the surface, nobody from the crew, even with everyone's combined fishing experience, had seen anything like it before in their lives. Kasana told NPR that finding a Greenland shark in the coastal waters of Belize suggests that the species can be found in the tropics as well as the Arctic. 6. Yellow Brick Road to Atlantis. In early 2022, oceanographers on board the EV Nautilus, an underwater exploration vessel, discovered what appeared to be a well-preserved road made of brick on the bottom of the sea off the coast of Hawaii. The alleged road was found near a submarine range of volcanic mountains known as Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. On April 29, 2022, researchers were shocked to find such a structure at a depth of 3,376 feet, located next to the summit of Nootka Seamount. The brick road was discovered by the team as part of their Luai Hikaiki Kumu expedition, and it was even captured on video for the first time during the group's live stream on YouTube. One of the scientists jokingly identified it as the Road to Atlantis, but some people truly believe this could be evidence of the legendary Lost City. Apparently, only 3% of the underwater mountain range, which stretches 583,000 square miles, has been recorded, suggesting there may be some secrets waiting to be uncovered. And so, it's easy to understand why some might think this could be proof of the existence of Atlantis. But researchers on the Nautilus believe that the Yellow Brick Road is nothing more than an example of ancient active volcanic geology. What was initially thought to be brick was later identified to be hyaloclastite, a type of volcanic rock that's formed during high-energy eruptions, where rock fragments typically settle to the seabed. The team explained that while the 90-degree fractures in the underwater feature make it seem like stone laid for a road, it was most likely just a result of cooling and heating stress from multiple eruptions. So, unfortunately, the hunt for Atlantis continues. If you discovered a mysterious yellow brick road in the middle of nowhere, would you follow it in hopes that it would lead you to somewhere magical? Or would you ignore it because you don't believe in fairy tales? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 5. Underwater city of Xicheng. In 1959, the Chinese city of Xicheng was flooded and forgotten about. However, it was rediscovered by divers in 2001 after the Chinese government organized an expedition to explore the 600-year-old metropolis that some have dubbed the Atlantis of the East. Xicheng translates to Lion City in Mandarin. Surprisingly, it was actually flooded on purpose in order to make room for the Xinan Dam and its hydroelectric station. When this took place, almost 300,000 people were relocated, including families that inhabited the city for centuries. Interest in the sunken metropolis increased in 2011, when the Chinese National Geography published several never-before-seen illustrations and images hypothesizing what the city of Xicheng might have looked like in its prime. Measuring less than a square kilometer, the city was relatively small, but it once had 5 different entrance gates instead of the traditional 4. Xicheng's wide streets were accompanied by 265 archways, which featured preserved stonework of dragons, lions, phoenixes, and other historical inscriptions. The city's walls are thought to date back to the 16th century, with some inscriptions dated to 1777. And despite being lost underwater for decades, Xicheng has remained amazingly well preserved. The water actually proved to protect the city from sun erosion, rain, and wind damage. Today, experienced divers are able to get a closer look at the ruins with dive operators like Ziao Diving Club and Big Blue, which both run regular dives every year between April and November. 4. Pufferfish artist. Male Japanese pufferfish put all other romantics to shame, as it was discovered in 2013 that the fish works 24 hours a day to sculpt a complete ephemeral design on the sandy floor of the ocean in order to attract potential mates. This genus of pufferfish works tirelessly when it's time for them to find a female, and they do so by showing off their artistic side. The fish will spend days on end spinning and wiggling its fins in order to create dozens of meticulously designed valleys and ridges that radiate outward from the middle of the pattern. If the pufferfish succeeds in creating a design that's both precise and intricate, a female will typically take notice and choose to mate with the male. Footage of this extraordinary mating behavior was captured by researchers from BBC Earth, and it was shared with thousands of viewers in a 2014 nature documentary series called Life Story. According to the episode's narrator, Sir David Attenborough, once the pufferfish starts shaping his design, he can't stop, because if he does, the ocean current could erase all of his hard work. And so, he works continuously until his creation is finally complete. The complex patterns created by the male pufferfish typically consist of several interconnected parts that ultimately make up a larger circular design. Based on reports from Live Science, pufferfish usually only measure around 5 inches long, while their sculptures in the sand can reach an astonishing 7 foot in diameter. 3. The Endurance. The Endurance shipwreck was discovered in early 2022. Over a century after it sank to the bottom of the Weddell Sea. It met its eventual demise in 1915 when it was crushed by sea ice, forcing Sir Ernest and the rest of his crew to make a hasty escape on foot and in small boats. Apparently, the vessel was lost until it was rediscovered again by a team from the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust, FMHT. The hunt for the long-lost ship was launched by the FMHT using a South African icebreaker ship called Agulhas II. The team was also equipped with remotely operated submersibles to help them identify the sunken wreckage. Dr. John Shears, the leader of the mission and veteran polar geographer, spoke with BBC News and described the moment as jaw-dropping when their cameras showed the ship's name for the first time. He further explained that the discovery of the wreck was an incredible achievement. The Endurance was found sitting at a depth of almost 10,000 feet. The team's submersible spent more than 2 weeks scouring the bottom of a predefined search area before they finally uncovered the wreckage. Amazingly, Endurance was located on the 100th anniversary of Sir Ernest's funeral. Under the International Antarctic Treaty, the wreck site has been designated a monument and mustn't be disturbed in any way. Because of this, not a single artifact from the sunken ship has been brought to the surface. 2. Squid Mum. At a depth of over 4,500 feet below the surface, a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, captured footage of a deep-sea squid carrying hundreds of pearl-like eggs in the waters off the California coast in July 2022. According to Michelle Starr from Science Alerts, this was only the second time in history that a team of scientists managed to capture a deep-sea squid exhibiting brooding behavior. The first time occurred back in 2005, when a genus of squid known as Barthioteuthis berrii was seen holding a sheet of nearly 400 eggs. Apparently, this type of squid can be found all over the place, and they typically feed on krill. Most of the time, a female squid will reproduce by leaving her egg cases on the floor of the ocean. Either that, or she releases the eggs in a gelatinous mass that drifts throughout open water. Because of this, it's extremely rare to capture a squid brooding over its eggs, since they generally perish soon after laying them. At the moment, only 3 squid species are known to exhibit this type of behavior, and experts aren't exactly sure why. However, they think it has something to do with keeping the eggs away from predators, which would greatly improve the hatchling's chances of survival. Based on these amazing observations, biologists now suspect that other types of deep-sea squids may also brood their eggs. 1. Ancient Greek computer. The world's oldest computer was found fully submerged in the water surrounding the Greek island of Antikythera at the turn of the 20th century by a group of fishermen. Below the weight of the sand, water, and the sunken ship that once carried the ancient device were the astronomical machine's mechanical parts and bronze gears that had slowly rusted and warped over the years. When a group of fishermen stumbled upon the wreckage of the old ship, they discovered a plethora of treasure that was submerged along with it, including the old Greek computer that's known today as the Antikythera mechanism. 2 years after the initial discovery of the wreckage, Greek politician Spiridon Stais made a trip to the museum that housed the ancient mechanism. He had organized the underwater excavation of the ship, and out of all the incredible artifacts that were pulled from the vessel, including sculptures, pottery, and coins, a rusted lump of metal was at the center of his attention. This chunk of metal was found to be a piece of the Antikythera mechanism, although Stais didn't know it at the time. Over the last several decades, scientists have been using CT scans and X-rays to peek inside the ancient computer in order to accurately reconstruct what it may have looked like when it was first put together. Scientists believe that it was likely made sometime between 200 BC and 70 BC. They know that the clock-sized device contained a complicated collection of around 30 spinning and interlocking gears. They believe these gears control dials that track the sun, the moon, the planets of our solar system, and even eclipses. The device was originally built with a crank that stretched out from the computer's frame and spun the gears, also controlling the movement of the hands on the dials. This allowed the user to predict eclipses, as well as the passage of celestial bodies through the night sky. According to Joe Marchant, who works for the Smithsonian, nothing as sophisticated as the Antikythera mechanism was seen again for more than 1,000 years. What's even more amazing is that in 2016, an inscription on the device was revealed by scans, which appeared to be some type of explanatory label. This suggests that perhaps the machine was mass-produced, accompanied by easy-to-read instructions for users who wanted to track the movement of the planets and stars thousands of years ago. 7. Atacama Skeleton. Over 20 years ago, an explorer traveling through a ghost town in Chile's Atacama Desert came across a startling discovery. They uncovered a mummified skeleton, although it didn't seem to belong to a human or animal. The mummy was found in a leather purse and was only 6 inches in length. Although it had human features like hard human teeth and similar anatomy, there were some key differences. For one, the size was odd. It also had 12 ribs, large eye sockets, and an incredibly pointed chin. Many rumors circulated that it was an alien skeleton, which was further fueled when a 2013 documentary on UFOs featured it. But what exactly is the Atacama skeleton? Scientists studied the mummy and confirmed through DNA samples that it's the body of a female, and more importantly, that it is human. Her DNA revealed some startling mutations that scientists had never seen before. For example, despite the fact that her skeleton was only 6 inches long, her bones showed development and growth that scientists would expect to see in a 6-year-old child. Her remains had mutations that were completely unknown to science before this point and haven't been seen since. Researchers were able to rebuild a large portion of the skeleton's DNA and realized she was a young girl with Chilean heritage. Although the bones can't be precisely dated, she has some European ancestry, which means she lived and died after Chile was conquered in the 1500s. Also, the fact that there were still fairly large fragments of DNA for them to analyze meant she had to be born within the last 500 years. Despite passing away centuries ago, it's hoped that this mysterious discovery can help scientists better understand skeletal conditions such as dwarfism, scoliosis, and more. There's also still hope that other skeletons may be found that share Atacama's condition. There have been some unconfirmed reports of similar remains, but at this point, the Atacama skeleton remains unique and one of nature's strangest phenomena. 6. The MS Estonia ferry. On the overnight cruise between Sweden and Estonia, the 15,000-ton steel MS Estonia ferry, passengers could enjoy a swimming pool, sauna, casino, and theater, as well as labyrinths of rooms for up to 2,000 people. But in the early hours of September 28, 1994, the Estonia sank under strange circumstances in the Baltic Sea during a storm. It became Europe's greatest peacetime maritime tragedy, with the loss of 852 out of 980 people on board. But what exactly happened? For years, the official reason was chalked up to technical failure. Many passengers and survivors of the event didn't think this was true though. In 2020, Swedish journalist Henrik Evertsson found more videos of the boat wreck for a new documentary, and their doubts about the sinking became even more relevant. One of the main things survivors on the ferry heard that night was a very loud bang, so loud that it stunned many of them. They started to scramble to safety as their car deck rapidly filled with water, leading the MS Estonia to sink within just 50 minutes. The report on the sinking was made in 1997 by the Joint Accident Investigation Committee, JAIC, a commission formed by the governments of Estonia, Sweden, and Finland. The locks on the bow door, where the car deck was, had broken thanks to the pressure of massive waves slamming into the ship. This meant that the door split apart from the rest of the ship, dragging the ramp behind it and triggering the flooding. But this report did not satisfy survivors. In fact, they were annoyed that no one on the committee would listen to their stories or interview them about what went on that night. Evertsson and his crew went to the site and recorded footage of the sunken ship's length and width. During these recordings, they found a 14-foot-long hole in the ship's hull, contradicting the JAIC report's conclusion of no exterior damage and implying that the disaster was caused by some kind of collision. When the documentary was released in late 2020, it caused such an uproar that Estonia's government immediately dispatched its prime minister to look into the matter with both Finland and Sweden. Although no new investigations have been made, many are calling for the truth of the mysterious sinking to finally be discovered. 5. Voynich manuscript. The 15th century Voynich manuscript has been a mysterious and cult sensation since its first discovery in 1912. The book is ornately decorated with unusual drawings of alien vegetation, nude women, strange items, and zodiac symbols. It's full of writing in an unknown language or code as well. This makes it unlike anything historians have ever seen, especially for the time period. The language inside looks like a form of Latin, but many scholars have tried to translate it and failed. As a result, it's even gained its own term to describe the language used: Voynichese. It's not like the drawings and illustrations help with anything either. They're also weird, they don't offer any meaningful context. Not only that, but we don't know who actually wrote it. It gets its name for the antiquarian bookseller who uncovered it in 1912, Wilfrid Voynich, although it was once the property of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II of Germany, who believed it was written by Roger Bacon, but this is not yet confirmed. From then, it passed through hands a few times over the decades, with the last known owner of the book before Voynich being Athanasius Kircher in 1666. Historians have had many theories as to what the manuscript is. One recent proposition is that it could be a guide to primitive women's medicine, given the abundance of drawings of women and medicinal herbs. As for the text, they seem like they could be Latin medical abbreviations. But this was quickly debunked by other scholars. What do you think the Voynich manuscript is about? Let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. 4. The painting of a time traveler with a mobile phone. The Unexpected One is a painting made by Ferdinand George Waldmüller in 1860. It shows a man waiting to surprise a woman with a pink rose. But the most interesting feature of this painting is the woman in the center. Her hands are placed in front of her and she's looking at a rectangular black object in them. It looks similar to a modern-day smartphone, and it's hard to describe it as anything else. That is, unless you look at it with the 19th century in mind. What looks like a cell phone to someone today is actually a small prayer book. This isn't the only time a modern invention has been spotted in a famous old painting. A 1670 work by Dutch painter Pieter de Hooch also seems to show a man holding what looks to be a smartphone, this time with the screen visible to whoever looks at the artwork. Of course, this picture and others have made conspiracy theorists crazy. More often than not, though, the most likely explanation turns out to be true. 3. Göbekli Tepe. Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist, found a collection of 20 stone circles in Turkey's Göbekli Tepe. The largest contained 2 pillars with carved human figures and foxskin belts. The pillars were 18 feet tall and weighed around 10 tons. The structures are over 11,000 years old. Not only do they predate Stonehenge by thousands of years, but they were constructed by people who hadn't even domesticated animals or figured out how to make metal tools. Schmidt and his team discovered stone tools and other evidence indicating that the circular enclosures were made by hunter-gatherers. There was no sign of cultivated grains or remains of domesticated livestock. But why would pre-Neolithic people build this? Experts such as Schmidt believed that it was a place of worship created by tribes collaborating together. This revelation took the archaeological and anthropological worlds by storm. Until this point, it was considered unheard of for structures to be built for ritual purposes, especially in the times predating domestication. Some media started calling the site the birthplace of religion, and one German magazine even described the grassland surrounding it like the Garden of Eden. Over time, interest in the site has grown, not only as a point of archaeological fascination but as a tourist attraction, with a visitor center nearby and a steel shelter to protect it from the elements. The interest also led to additional excavations at a deeper level. These finds turned the story of Göbekli Tepe on its head once again, as archaeologists found evidence of homes as well as equipment for grinding grain and brewing beer. The site, therefore, seems to be the remains of a hybrid culture between hunter-gatherers and a domesticated way of life. It is likely that the people of Göbekli Tepe will rewrite their history books. They're certainly reshaping our understanding of pre-Neolithic life today. 2. The Somerton Man. In 1948, the body of a well-dressed man was found collapsed against the seawall of Somerton Beach, Australia. When police came to investigate, they couldn't find anything to help indicate who he was. All the tags and labels in his jacket and tie had been cut off, and the only thing in his pockets were bus and train tickets and a note in Persian that read Tamam Shud, which means finished. The autopsy seemed to indicate heart failure from poisoning, and the police couldn't rule out foul play. But with no leads and no clue as to who the man was, the case went cold pretty quickly. But who was he? Many theorized that he might be a spy, especially with the cryptic Persian text that he was found with. It took 73 years to find the answer. The Somerton Man was Australian and from Victoria. His name was Carl Webb, and he was a 43-year-old electrician. But having his name still didn't solve the mystery as to why he ended up on the beach. Some people think that he took his own life and that the note was a suicide letter of sorts. Others speculate that the man was the father of a famous Australian dancer named Robin Thompson, although this has never been confirmed. 1. Nan Madol. Nan Madol is located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Pont Bay, part of the Federated States of Micronesia. This ancient city structure is a world marvel and one of the biggest engineering mysteries. Nan Madol stretches across interlinked small islands and is built out of log-shaped volcanic basalt rocks. It was home to the Saint-Hilaires and their royal family between 1100 and 1600 AD. But the thing that baffles historians is how this amazing megastructure was actually constructed. Massive basalt logs were transported from Pont Bay and placed horizontally on Madol, log cabin style, to create walls as tall as 50 feet and as thick as 17 feet, with each one weighing at least 5 tons, with some even weighing in at 25 tons. Experts have no idea how this was achieved. Not only the acts of getting the logs to the site, but also raising them up for building. It would have taken tens of thousands of people, pretty much the entire population of the island at the time. Local myths do come up with some ideas about how Nan Madol came to be. They say it was made by a mysterious civilization using underground tunnels, as well as some magic. The legends also claim that underneath Nan Madol are the tombs of kings and even a few giants. Other tales say it was as if ghostly hands appeared out of thin air to pluck the basalt logs up from Pohnpei Island, to float them across the water and build the settlement. It's no wonder the locals have nicknamed Nan Madol the City of Ghosts. According to more scientific theories, the stones were likely transported on bamboo rafts. But this was tested in a 1995 documentary on Nan Madol, and experts were unable to successfully float any stones or cargo weighing over a ton, a lot less than the 5-ton average of the logs making up the city. Adding on from the locals' theories, it's said that those who interfere with the structure or try to enter its tombs will be cursed. On April 29, 1907, the German governor of the island, Victor Berg, decided he wanted to see what all the fuss was about and opened one of the royal tombs. He supposedly found the skeletons of 6'5" to 9'10" individuals, but that was the least of his worries. A storm washed in across the island with strong winds, and Berg fell into madness, unable to move. The next day, Berg was dead. Physicians couldn't figure out what his cause of death was, although locals said it was the vengeance of the gods. Nowadays, experts think it was likely a combination of heat stroke and dehydration. Either way, Nan Madol continues to mystify to this day. Thanks for watching. Which one of these mysterious discoveries did you find the most interesting? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye.